enables those debts to be repaid. So even though the government spending goes to unemployed workers with welfare, the unemployed workers go to Walmart and spend their goods there. So effectively the money is subsidising, government-created money is subsidising firms during a downturn, giving them the cash flow they wouldn't otherwise have, which means they can service their debts. So you get a renewal of the cycles once the debt levels have been reduced a bit. So all these things become an essential part of his logic, and it starts with debt. And that's one reason I covered so much detail about the role of debt in creating money and then leading to cycles as well. So if you look at the long-term performance of the economy, this is the level and the rate of change of private debt in America from 1830 forward. And you've got significant periods in the 1800s where there was negative debt. See all these points below the dotted line there are when debt is actually falling. So you look at the level of private debt, that's the red line here, the ratio of private debt to GDP. There's significant periods of falling debt. And what they give you are financial crises, and you can see, I'll try to use the mouse to identify, okay. So you've got a crisis back here in the 1840s, one in the 1850s, in the 1870s, the 1890s, 1910s, and there's the Great Depression. Now you look at the post-war period, nothing, until 2008. So, and you can see the level of private debt. The tendency for America was for it to rise after every crisis and then a crash of some description. That is actually, you see the debt levels rising there while the level of debt's falling. The reason is GDP was falling faster than people were repaying the debt. So that's why you've got this coincidence of rising debt level with falling level of private debt. But for that period, and this is the crucial period of the Great Depression, from 1930 to 33, you had huge level of private sector deleveraging. And that's eliminating money from the economy as well as eliminating debt. A bit of a recovery, and then Roosevelt was persuaded to try to balance the budgets once more, and when that happened, the private sector went back into deleveraging again. And the recovery, huge reduction in the debt, only occurred during the Second World War. So at the end of the Second World War, we then have the debt level being here. If you look at that level, it's the lowest that private debt had been in 60 years. Okay. And you then had a period of rising private debt, a boom, and that's the period, the 70s period I ended up identifying forward, 70s to 80s. A boom and then a crash in the 1990s.
What happened then?
Pardon?
What happened in the 90s? Is this the Asian crisis?
No, well, the 1970s was the first major financial crisis was 1972 to 74, and there was a huge boom followed by a crash. It's actually most obvious in the Australian data. I'll show you that later. But that little pimple there, yeah, that's a boom and bust, and that's the first time we didn't have an actual. You can see there was a huge increase and then a fall in debt, in credit. A lot of instability across this period, but that volatility in credit was far greater than what had been the norm after the Second World War. So if you look, I'll actually use this mouse here. If you look at that level here is about a 5% of GDP level of the change in debt. And we then had this big spike up to over 12%. And then when that collapsed, that was really the breaking point for the pre-war, for the pre-instability period, the 50s and 60s Minsky spoke about. From that point on, volatility in credit became the rule. And if you look up here and see how the rate of growth of private debt in America was the highest it's been in recorded history. Now, this is all the stuff I can't get the neoclassicals even to look at, because according to their theories, debt doesn't matter. Okay, that's why I took you the exercise yesterday, showing the difference between a model where banks are intermediaries and banks are originators. Because they think, well, they're intermediaries, therefore one balances out the other, doesn't matter, they ignore this completely. When you look at it, they ignored the biggest private debt bubble in the history of American capitalism. And that's why they didn't see the crisis coming. So Minsky did.